All right, today we're going to pull back the curtain on the hidden rules that shape pretty much everything we do online. We'll kick things off with the internet's one golden rule, and then we'll dive into a whole universe of other principles that designers use to build, well, the entire digital world we live in. You know that feeling, right? You're filling out a form and it just crashes because you put spaces in your phone number. But then you open another app and you just instantly get it. You know exactly how to use it. Well, that difference, it isn't magic. It's all about design, and it's governed by a secret set of laws. Okay, so let's get right into it. We're going to start with what is arguably the single most important rule of them all. I mean, this is the one that really made the internet we know and use today even possible. And here it is. It's called Postel's Law, or sometimes the Robustness Principle. It was written way back in 1981 by an internet pioneer named John Postel. And this one little sentence has been shaping how the internet works for decades. So, what does that actually mean? Well, think of it like being a good conversationalist. You should try to speak as clearly as possible. That's being conservative in what you send. But you should also be able to understand someone even if they kind of mumble or use slightly weird phrasing. That's being liberal in what you accept. A website that follows this rule, it'll take your phone number with dashes or spaces or parentheses, and it won't just crash. You could call it empathetic design. And the guy behind the law, John Postel, he was a giant, a real guardian of the early internet. He was so important that Vint Cerf, who's often called one of the fathers of the internet, wrote this incredible tribute to him. See, Postel wasn't just writing rules for machines. He was setting a whole philosophical standard for how we should interact online. Okay, so let's see how this idea really builds, because Postel's principle isn't just about being, nice to the user. It's a really powerful engineering concept for building things that can actually survive in our messy, unpredictable world. It's a bigger idea called fault-tolerant design, and the whole point is to build systems that actually expect failure. They anticipate it, and they're designed to handle it gracefully instead of just falling apart. Postel's law is basically that idea, but for communication. So you can think of it as two completely different philosophies. On one hand, you have a brittle system. It's super rigid. It expects everything to be perfect, and one tiny error can bring the whole thing crashing down. But a fault-tolerant system, it's resilient. It knows things will go wrong, like a user typing in weird data. And it's built to adapt instead of just breaking. And here's a fantastic way to picture it. Think about a massive truck with a whole bunch of tires. If one of those tires blows out, no big deal, right? The others carry the load, and the truck keeps on moving. That's redundancy. Postel's law just applies that same thinking to data, making sure one weird input doesn't cause a total system crash. But here's the thing, Postel's law isn't alone, not by a long shot. It's actually just one star in this whole constellation of design principles. These are often called UX laws, and they're the secret toolkit designers use to make our digital experiences feel totally effortless. You can kind of group them into big themes like expectation, simplicity, and productivity. So let's just grab one from each and see how they work in the wild. First up, Jacob's Law. This one is huge. It basically says that users spend most of their time on other websites, not yours. So they've already built up these mental models for how things are supposed to work. That's why a shopping cart icon always looks like a shopping cart. Don't reinvent the wheel. Just use what people already know, and your site will feel intuitive from the second they land on it. Okay, next is Hick's Law. You have definitely felt this one before. It's that feeling of analysis paralysis you get when you're faced with too many choices. The more options you give someone, the longer it takes them to decide. It creates what's called cognitive load, and if it gets too high, people will just give up and leave. So how do designers fight that? Well, they do exactly this. Instead of hitting you with one massive, scary registration form with 20 different fields, they break it up. They give you a few simple screens, one after the other. The amount of work is exactly the same, but because they've reduced the choices at each step, it feels way, way easier to get through. And finally, let's talk about Parkinson's Law. Oh man, everybody knows this feeling. It's the idea that a task will expand to fill whatever time you give it. If a job should only take 2 hours, but you have a whole week to get it done, somehow it takes the entire week. It shows that sometimes having tight constraints can actually make us more focused and efficient. But this is where things get really interesting, because these laws can run smack into messy, real-world human behavior. There was a story on Reddit from a healthcare worker. She was so efficient she could see way more patients than her coworkers. But instead of being praised, she was told to slow down. Why? Because her efficiency was making everyone else look bad, so the system, the human system, actually punished her for being too productive.
And that just makes you wonder, right? These rules aren't just about code. They're about people and psychology and group dynamics. Why would a system and the people in it sometimes actively resist being more productive? Sometimes the most efficient path just isn't the one people want to take.
And that idea of unexpected consequences, it actually brings us full circle, right back to our golden rule, Postel's law. Because for all its amazing benefits, it turns out there's a dark side to being so flexible and forgiving. See, the problem is, what happens when you're too liberal, too accepting? You start letting in buggy, flawed data. And if enough systems start doing that, well, pretty soon, that flaw becomes the expected behavior. That bug becomes the new standard. And then, any new software that comes along is forced to copy the bug just to be compatible with everything else. So you end up with this constant tension. On one side, you have the ideal of Postel's law, a robust, user-friendly internet. But on the other, you have this huge danger of what's called bug-for-bug compatibility. It's where being too tolerant of errors actually ends up lowering the quality and even the security for everybody, because those flaws just become part of the system. Which leaves us with a really tough question, doesn't it? These unspoken rules, they're not absolute truths. It's all a balancing act. How much imperfection should a system tolerate just to give us a smoother experience? And at what point does all that flexibility actually start to cause more harm than good? It's a trade-off that designers and engineers have to navigate every single day.